It had survived the Napoleonic Wars. It had financed the Louisiana Purchase. 233 years. The Queen of England's bank. Destroyed by one trader. In one hidden account. In Singapore. This is Barings Bank. Barings Bank was founded in 1762 and it had financed the Napoleonic Wars and the Louisiana Purchase, and it had survived every financial crisis in British history for 233 years, and in February 1995 a 28-year-old trader in Singapore named Nick Leeson destroyed it entirely with a series of unauthorized bets on Japanese stock market futures, and the total loss was £827 million, and the bank that had once been described as the Queen of England's bank was sold for £1, and the story of how it happened is one of the most extraordinary in financial history because it raises a question that is still uncomfortable to answer. How does a single trader hide losses of that scale for years inside one of the most prestigious banks in the world without anyone noticing? Nick Leeson grew up in Watford, a working-class suburb of London, and he left school without the kind of qualifications that typically open doors into City of London finance, but he had energy and ambition and a facility with numbers, and he found his way into the back office of Coutts Bank and then Morgan Stanley and then Barings, and in 1992 Barings sent him to Singapore to run the futures trading operation on the Singapore International Monetary Exchange, which was known as SIMEX, and this was a significant opportunity for a young man with his background, and he performed brilliantly at first, generating genuine profits for Barings through arbitrage between SIMEX and the Osaka Securities Exchange, exploiting tiny price differences in Nikkei 225 futures contracts between the two exchanges. But in 1992 a junior member of Leeson's team made an error, a small mistake in executing a client order, and to avoid the loss appearing on the official books Leeson hid it in a dormant account number 88,888, a number considered lucky in Chinese culture and one that Leeson thought might escape attention. And the loss was small, around £20,000, and Leeson convinced himself he would make it back quickly and close the account and nobody would ever know, and this was the beginning of everything. The losses did not stay small, and Leeson kept trading to try to recover them, and sometimes he made money and sometimes he lost more, and every time he lost he hid the new losses in account 88888, and every time he thought he was close to recovering he would increase his bets to get there faster, and the positions grew and the losses grew, and account 88888 became a repository for an ever-increasing mountain of hidden losses that Leeson was managing in secret while simultaneously submitting false reports to Barings that showed the Singapore operation as profitable. By January 1995 the losses in account 88888 had reached approximately £200 million, and then on January 17, 1995 the Great Hanshin earthquake struck Kobe, Japan, and the Japanese stock market fell sharply, and Leeson, who had built enormous long positions in Nikkei futures betting the market would rise, saw his positions immediately move against him, and instead of closing the positions he doubled down, an action that would prove catastrophic, because he believed the market would recover, and if it did he would recover the losses and close account 88888 and it would all be over. The market did not recover sufficiently and the positions kept growing, and by February 1995 Leeson had accumulated positions in Nikkei futures contracts equivalent to approximately 3 times the entire daily trading volume of the SIMEX exchange. A concentration so enormous that when it eventually became known it shocked even experienced market participants. And the losses in account 88888 had grown to £827 million, more than the entire capital of Barings Bank. On February 23, 1995 Nick Leeson left a note on his desk that said, "I'm sorry," and he fled Singapore with his wife, initially to Malaysia and then to Brunei and then to Frankfurt, where he was arrested trying to board a flight back to London. And while he was fleeing, Barings was trying to understand what had happened, and the Dutch banking group ING offered to acquire Barings for £1 if they could understand the full extent of the liabilities, and they could not find a way to make the numbers work, in Barings Bank, 233 years old, was sold to ING for £1 on March 5, 1995. Nick Leeson was extradited to Singapore, and in 1995 he was convicted of fraud and forgery and sentenced to 6.5 years in prison, and he served 4.5 years before being released in 1999, having been diagnosed with colon cancer during his imprisonment, and he subsequently wrote a book about his experience called Rogue Trader, which became a film, and he later built a career as a public speaker on risk management. A trajectory that some found remarkable and others found deeply uncomfortable. The question that the Barings collapse raised, and which it raises still, is how did it happen, and the answer is a failure of oversight so comprehensive that it is almost difficult to believe, and Nick Leeson had been given an extraordinary degree of independence in Singapore. He ran both the trading operation and the back office, which meant that he was responsible for executing trades and also for recording and reconciling those trades, a fundamental internal control failure that should never have been permitted, because it meant there was no independent check on his activity, and the reports he sent to London showing the Singapore operation as profitable were apparently accepted at face value for years without adequate verification. And the questions that senior management at Barings asked about the Singapore operation, when they asked at all, were answered by Leeson himself, and he answered them with fiction. Barings had also failed to implement the most basic risk controls. Nobody at senior management level appeared to understand that Leeson's positions were so large that a relatively modest adverse market move would result in losses exceeding the bank's total capital, and the supervisory infrastructure that should have caught this, the risk management function, the internal audit function, the external audit, all failed simultaneously, and the Bank of England, which was responsible for supervising Barings, also came in for significant criticism. So what is the real lesson of Barings Bank? And the lesson is about the relationship between trust and control, and Barings gave Nick Leeson extraordinary trust. Trust based on the profits he appeared to be generating, and in doing so they removed the controls that would have caught what he was actually doing. And the lesson is that in financial institutions, as in most institutions where individual actors can generate significant gains or losses, trust and verification cannot be substitutes for each other, and the moment an institution decides that the performance of a single individual justifies removing the checks on that individual's activity, it has created the conditions for catastrophe. And the catastrophe may not come immediately, it may take years, but it will come. That is the capital case. Subscribe to the capital case, because the next case is already waiting.